Could I just start with a warning, though, against kind of, I was going to say techno-determinism, that's the wrong phrase, obsession with technology, obsession with the web. If you look at what we and what the world have gone through, we go through in 2008 the biggest crash since 1929. It's not as severe as in 1929 because essentially the US Federal Reserve just prints money and just lends money to the world without limit. No one, the politicians maybe even realised what it was doing. It was so, the support for the banking system, not just in America and Europe. Gordon Brown does much the same here. But it still had the most awful consequences. Real wages now are no higher than they were in 2005. So if you are under 30, you've never really had a pay increase. You know? If you're over 30, you've had years and years and years without effective pay increases, on average. You then have austerity that Andrew mentioned, the massive cost of paying for all of this. And although it's not wholly true, because in all recessions, if you like, inequality narrows because the people with most to lose most because the value of their assets go down. It is the case, particularly with the effects of quantitative easing on asset values, that the rich, or people who stayed rich, have seen their wealth at least partly protected, while those at the bottom, you see in from the homeless, from anyone relying on benefits apart from pensioners, who of course always successive governments now buy off, have seen really hardship and in many cases acute hardship. It's very fashionable in my world, which is perhaps your world. I'm going to make assumptions about you. You know, you're an audience of defence Andrew's organised in Worstons, so I'm going to assume that on the whole you're generally liberal. And perhaps I'm being, you know, perhaps I'm jumping to all kinds of conclusions here, and you're probably all wrong. We've also seen. Sorry, I just mentioned austerity. Andrew talks about austerity. In my world of liberal left, it's very fashionable to say, "Oh, Brexit. Oh, yeah. Well, you know when that happened? Austerity." Well, that's part of the reason it happened, but it's also happened because of nationalism, because of if not out-and-out racism, at least a desire to absolutely cut back on immigration. Things that you know, left-wing people are less comfortable talking about. But again, just going on, in America now, within our lifetimes, it will become what sociologists call a minority-majority country. In other words, the whites, if you can lump all together, will become a minority in America. It's Hispanic, African, Black American, Asian populations increase. Now, imagine all these things had happened, and Tim Berners-Lee had got a job in his local co-op. Imagine all these things had happened and the internet had never been invented. Do you not think there has been the most massive political reaction? The 1929 crash brought Hitler to power. It set off wars. It helped it pushed the Japanese towards greater militarism. It turned Mussolini's fascism far nastier. You know, the crisis of the 1970s, which I'd say I'm the only person here old enough to remember, but the crisis of the 1970s, again, you know, huge turmoil around the world. The idea that, on its own, technology creates these things is very seductive and I always think is a little bit dangerous. I mean, I can imagine being here 30 years ago and hearing people argue, oh well, the reason Maggie Thatcher keeps in power is the Sun and the male brainwashed working class voters voting for her. Well, that's as may be, but the truth is, if you just think your problems are caused by the supply of information, then you're probably not facing up to them. You're certainly probably not being self-critical and saying, well, what is it we're doing that we're losing? Why are we losing? Because because it's very easy to just say, we're fine, we're great, we're absolutely bloody marvellous. It's only if it wasn't for Facebook or before that the Daily Mail. So that is a very big caveat, and one I think you should always bear in mind. The world is in crisis, and that crisis, economic crisis, movements of population, changes, those always produce a political reaction. It didn't take Cambridge Analytica to help fascism and communism in the 30s. You know, they could manage on their own. So please bear that in mind in all discussions of that. That said, there are obviously two huge consequences that are flowing from social media and new technology. The first is that it makes it easier for people to live in, if they wish, in a self-referential world where their prejudices are pampered and tickled, and there's actually a commercial interest in keeping people there. If you'll allow me to explain. When the web first comes along in the 1990s, there's a great wave of techno-utopianism. Very libertarian movement essentially comes out of belief in what the web could do. Well, the web's decentralised, everyone will have a voice, everyone can get together, this is going to produce freer, more equal societies. There was someone, I've forgotten his name, he used to be with the Grateful Dead, which is this ancient 70s rock band, who then became a great he issued a manifesto for cyberspace. I'm quoting from memory, it begins, "O governments, ye giants of flesh and steel, you have no place in the new world." And it was all going to be free, dictatorships would find it impossible to suppress dissent. This view carries right the way through to the Arab Spring of, 2009, 2010, forgive me. Right the way through to the Arab Spring, yeah, Hillary Clinton, Gordon Brown, were all saying, yeah, people on Twitter, you know, they can get round all these fuddy-duddy generals, these men with guns, the mullahs. And it turns out not to be true. And it turns out not to be true for a reason I emphasised in my first point. Technology is situated within the world. The internet comes into a world where there are two forms of power. The state and the economy, business. We'll talk about the state a bit later, but let's just talk about the business side of it, because that's very, very important. Organisations like Facebook, like Twitter, are businesses. And one of the problems, or what's said to be a great problem, is this. 30 years ago, you might be very, very right-wing. You might read the Daily Mail every morning, read the Telegraph too, have exclusively like-minded friends, or very left-wing, you know. But you couldn't help but hear arguments and that challenge you. You just couldn't help it. You'd turn on the news, 6 o'clock news, you'd listen to the radio, you would hear people either polemically arguing against you, or just hear a narration of events that didn't fit your worldview. It's not quite that new technologies made that impossible, but it does make it far easier for all people, myself included, to live within, Americans call it silos, and to be comfortable living at that. And for instance, everything on your news feed, the posts you get are from people who agree with you. And you think, well, everyone thinks like that. Now, we're going to talk about, Andrew and I are going to talk about what we've done at some point. But from a business point of view, from the point of view of a citizen, you should say, well, hold on a second. We as a democracy want to say to Facebook, no way can you do this. You can't do this. You've got to present a balanced news feed. You've got to make people see things that they disagree with. But Facebook has got absolutely no business interest in doing that because, frankly, I'm sure not broad-minded people in this room, but other people might have they kept seeing things pop up in their Facebook feed that they profoundly disagreed with, saying, I'm going to log off Facebook, I'm not spending as much time on there anymore. The imperative for all technology companies is to keep you fixed on their page, on their system, for as long as they can, so they can get as much data about you as possible. That's how they make their money. They have absolutely no interest in any kind of sense of balance or a public good or of argument. And one thing I hope to talk about, Andrew, is if you like sort of rather free market people say, well, you know, when companies take your data and sell it, and there's a huge market for it, you should get a payment. I mean, I think it ought to be the job of the state to say the logarithms that Twitter, Facebook, whoever use, are a matter of public concern, and we should legislate on that. There is no argument to be put forward on that. On the second point I need to make to follow on from that is, this is only the start in a way, I think. I'm not a great expert on new technology at all, but all my colleagues who are say, well, look, you know, we are still in a world where you think of online and offline, of cyberspace and meat space, as they call it on Silicon Valley. You go on, going online is almost like an act of will. You get your phone out, you log on. You go home to your computer, you log on. You log off, you go away again. With artificial intelligence, with 5G, with the Internet of Things, the distinction between cyberspace and real space, if it's still there, will sort of collapse. You're constantly on cyberspace. You can get it now a bit with these things like Siri and Alexa. You know, you're just on in your home, waiting for you to talk, and sometimes recording you when you're not talking, being conscious. That is going to get far greater when all your household appliances are collected to the web. When you walk past a shop and the shop can put adverts up on your phone. When, I mean, you see it now with glasses. So the amount of data being collected on you is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. In journalism, it's had, because Andrew asked me to talk about that, it's had some good consequences, you know. It is far, far easier to fact check than it was. It's far harder for journalists, for those journalists who are embarrassed by those things and those publications who care about those things, which isn't all of them, to just get stuff wrong. I mean, in the old days, the Fleet Street I started on, you know, it could be all kinds of mistakes in an article. Maybe one letter published a week later. If the editor liked publishing letters pointing out mistakes, which a lot of editors didn't. Now, it's crystal clear, and, you know, if I make a mistake in something item, someone points it out, absolutely admit it. The reverse side of that is the business model for serious journalism. Collapsing is perhaps a bit hard. It's very, very difficult at a time when serious journalism is needed. I think of one little example, just nothing really. There was a picture that went viral of a dead man lying in the street, and it could have gone viral by left-wingers saying, look at the disgrace of Tory Britain, austerity Britain. Actually, it was right-wingers who did it, who said, a man is dead in the street in Leicester, while we give all this money away in foreign aid. Now, the Leicester Mercury, hold on a second, what's this? Why haven't we heard about this? The editor put 2 reporters on it. They went to all the homelessness shelters in Leicester, they checked the council, the whole thing was nonsense. In fact, they finally tracked the pictures down, being taken in Ecuador or somewhere. Now, they then run a story on that. That gets nothing like the hit, at all. Not off the original Facebook post that went viral. More to the point, the editor of the Leicester Mercury probably has a third of the reporters his predecessors had 30 years ago, quarter, maybe. He or she can't afford to just go off chasing, nailing down lies, nailing things down. Because the web has taken away all the advertising which papers here in Bristol would rely on. 30 years ago, if Bristol City Council wanted to advertise a job, it would have to put in the local press. If you wanted to, I don't know, buy a bike, buy a car, look for a job yourselves, the odds are you'd buy local paper or specialist paper. If you wanted to be a teacher, if you were training to be a teacher, you would buy The Guardian on Tuesdays when it had its education jobs, or buy The Times Education or something. Regardless of the fact, actually, you wanted to read The Guardian or The Times Education, and news organisations had this vast source of advertising revenue. And that has entirely gone, absolutely gone. Increasingly it's going from television companies, as companies no longer advertise on TV and go online. So in that sense, first of all, the money has just completely disappeared from journalism. And people are trying to find ways of getting around that, getting out of it. But, you know, it does mean the editor of Leicester Mercury, just for him to commit 2 reporters for 2 days is a massive, massive thing. And something he or she, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's a woman, wants to do. But, you know, it's not something you can do easily. The other problem newspapers, TV, BBC has had is, you know, this is the old thing, they're no longer the gatekeepers. They no longer decide what is news and what isn't news, which, again, has a very good side to it. Why should people decide? It's not as if when people talk about fake news, when people talk about lies being praised as truth, it's not as if there is a virtuous old media on one side and the wicked web on the other. On the contrary, you know, one of the greatest sources of fake news in Britain is the Daily Express. Not just on big issues, on, you know, absolute screaming gibberish about chemtrails in the sky causing cancer. We had the entire national press 10 years ago, led by the Lancet, a respectful medical magazine, going along with Andrew Wakefield and saying the MMR jab causes autism. A more clearer piece of fake news, and dangerously fake news. Fake news that can kill people, fake news that can kill kids, fake news that preys on the fear of parents about a condition no one understands and for which there is no treatment. Absolutely scandalous. They all went along with it. So, you know, it's not, you must be very, very careful, again, of setting up some, particularly if you're getting old like I am, of setting up some golden age. When I was young, things were straight then, and it's all awful now. But the consequences of not having a core of serious newspapers who at least meet some standards and at least say, well, actually, I mean, that's all very titillating, and I can see why people want to, it's just not true, isn't it? You say, all right, okay, let's not do it. Of those gatekeepers going, is that the old media becomes like the new media, in that the awful temptation, which most employers I work for, but I work for small, serious organisations, none of which ever make any money, is, well, you go for the clicks. You give people what they want, what they want to hear. And that is reinforced by the web, in that there's quite an interesting experiment on this. It's one of these things I don't quite know why people have to do experiments on. It all seems to be quite obvious about how groupthink works and how cults work. But some sociologists in America got a group of Republicans and a group of Democrats. And the Republicans went from the extreme right wing of the Republican Party through to the Senate, through to very, very moderate, you know, I'm just a registered Republican. The Democrats went the same, out to the left. And they took them away, they paid them to go away to a hotel. I think the Democrats went to some ski resort in the Rockies and the Republicans were sent to Texas, I'm sure it was Texas. And what they found was quite interesting is that when you put people together who all share the same identity, they get the most extreme voices win through. People bind themselves to the identity, become clearer. And at the beginning of it, at the beginning of the experiment, the people, if you like, on the left of the Republican Party and the right of the Democratic Party were virtually indistinguishable. You know, they just happened to call themselves Republicans or happened to call themselves Democrats. By the end, there were two camps. Now that is the effect of how the logarithms on of social media work. A final effect is you notice what gets hit. I mean, it's not just editors notice, people employing you notice. I can tell, I kind of have to be on Twitter, okay? And sometimes it's very good. Sometimes, you know, you write an article for an obscure publication, which doesn't have a big readership at all, but, you know, you put it out on Twitter, people like it. But I can tell within minutes if an article of mine is being read by a number of retweets, by a number of hits. I mean, editors, they have to notice that. They absolutely have to notice that. They're in this situation where their revenues, their traditional revenues have gone or are going. They desperately need to get people into the paper. They notice as well. And the temptation is to just write stuff you know your tribe likes. And what your tribe likes is to be told it's virtuous, to be told it's good, to be told that all taxes are smears, deliberate smears from wicked people who want to undermine them for their own motives. And that's what sells. That's what you give them. But above all, what sells is emotion and simplicity. Again, remember, fascism, communism happened in Europe, you know, before Turing had even been to Bletchley Park. Let's not, once again, let's not overemphasise bad word, but it's undoubtedly true. If you look, you know, we're human beings, we're emotional animals. If you look at what appeals, it is the big, bold, isn't this shocking? I always found it very noticeable that leaders of the Brexit campaign, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, were ex-journalists. So, you know, one, you do big, bold, isn't it shocking? Two, the solution is dead simple. Dead simple. Sack them, fire them, or in case of the EU, just get out. It's really simple. So you've got an extraordinary evil and a simple solution. And I do think that social media, which, you know, started off, if you go back to the 90s, and indeed I don't know, how do people refer to the last decade? Do people the zeros? The noughties sounds pathetic. You know, it sounds like a sort of West End farce. But anyway, that's another point. You know, the emphasis, it would all be liberal. The effect of new technology will be to carry human rights activists in Egypt or in the Congo or in China. Actually, you know, the most successful Western politician on social media is Donald Trump by a country mile. Hugely, hugely successful. The most successful use of social media in a recent election was by the Vote Leave campaign. And again, I do think, without trying to avoid the temptation of saying, oh, tempora, oh, mores, today is utterly awful and the past was always pure and golden when we were young, I do think that there is something about the post, the tweet, that encourages the two simplicities. This is utterly evil, wicked men have forced this upon us, and there's a dead simple solution. And that is why Britain is in this ludicrous mess over Brexit, which is consuming this country, making any real attempt to address any issue at all. Let alone, not talking great issues like climate change, like why our economy is so unproductive. I mean, just anything. A serious attempt to work out what's going wrong with schools, or how we're going to fund care for the elderly. Everything is pushed aside by this. And it's pushed aside because of the simplicity of the message. Britain could of course leave the European Union and cut off. We could have a hard Brexit, of course we could. We could leave the single market, leave the customs union, leave the European Court of Justice, but by God it would hurt. Or we could stay in the single market and the customs union, and then, well, what's the point of leaving? No point at all. But that is never said in 2016. It's just, in fact, nothing is said about what the plan to leave was. Not just by the politicians who are taking us out, but by David Cameron and the government. You compare it with Ireland, which had a referendum on abortion. I think it was last year or maybe the year before. In contrast, the Irish abortion referendum, there is citizens' glory going on for a year. In essence, there is a massive public discussion, televised, of whether the constitutional ban on abortion in Ireland should be overturned. If so, what should it be? The government does what the Cameron government doesn't do, then issues, and the Irish people in Europe have to forgive me because it wouldn't be called a white paper, but in effect a white paper, a draft piece of legislation saying, okay, if you vote in this referendum in favour of abortion, here is what the new law will be. And it was essentially, from memory, abortion on demand for the first 12 weeks. After that, it's really very difficult. Mother's life has to be in danger. So what that means is when the Irish vote for to overturn the constitutional ban on abortion, there can be no argument what they've done. Anti-abortionists can't say, oh yeah, okay, well I know they voted for it, but all that means is morning after pill, everything else stays illegal. Extreme libertarians can't say, oh well, yeah, we passed this, the country passed this abortion referendum, that means 9-month terminations are legal. No, it was quite clear what people were voting for. With Brexit, it was just in or out, leave. And leaving would be the easiest thing in the world, in Liam Fox's words. The reason why the Conservative Party is now falling apart is that that message, the utter simplicity of it, leaving with no cost, was believed by millions and millions of people. Not wholly because of social media, but in part because that is what social media allows, or one of the things it allows. It also allows you to read and follow the most erudite and informed people, is the big, simple message. And a message that gets greater potency because it never ever looks at complexity and never looks at costs. It always makes me laugh that Boris Johnson and the right wing of the Tory party are constantly talking about the Second World War. Boris Johnson even wrote a biography of Churchill, which he appears to think he was Churchill, or at least dropping huge hint, well, you've heard Churchill now, how about me? But Churchill in 1940 said, I have nothing to offer but blood, sweat, toil and tears. These are anti-Churchillian politicians. Very like the Scottish Nationalists in the 2014 referendum. You can have the most wrenching change, and it won't hurt a bit. It really won't. There will be no consequences. In fact, we'll be better off. And no politicians since, Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn certainly haven't, have ever just gone to the public and said, this is just nonsense. It's just lies. It's just not true. I mean, you can have it. We can have a no-deal Brexit, but by God it will hurt, I said. Or we can pretty much stay, but then we won't have a voice. That individuals have, activists have, journalists have tried to put that case, but there's a huge difference when it is not either the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition actually spelling out hard choices. Now, Can you blame all that on the web? No, of course you can't. But you have to think a bit about how easy it is to spread propaganda by the new technologies. Britain, one of the very good things about this country, things we'll be proud of, is we do not have, or didn't have in the 20th century, corrupt elections. You might think the first past the post system is a terrible system, whatever, but there was very, very tight controls on what could be said, what could be, how much could be spent. I mean, new technology is just blasting all of those out the window. My colleague, Carol Cadwallader on The Observer, did great work showing how the Trump, Cambridge Analytica had taken all kinds of details of people from Facebook. Facebook happy them take it, they used the Trump campaign, almost certainly used here. She got to the stage where she had leaked emails showing how Aaron Banks of Leave.eu, that's the UKIP campaign, was having meetings with the Russian ambassador, who was offering him stakes in Siberian gold mines. And it wasn't just the Tories weren't interested, Labour wasn't interested. Labour did not want to touch the story at all. Now that's partly because Corbyn, or the top of Labour, are pro-Brexit, but it's also because they want to do the same thing. You know, they may have been doing the same thing for all I know. You know, the possibilities of dark money, of money you can't trace, influencing elections, just explode with the web. Absolutely explode. And unless you have a very, very determined government saying, well, this is against, I'll come to a minute later on what we can do, but you know, the world where agents were carefully counting every penny a candidate was spending in an election, well, they can still do that, but it's almost irrelevant what a candidate here in Bristol does if you have huge amounts of money coming in from who knows where. Our laws against foreign funding for politics become more difficult to enforce. And all political parties, the temptation for all of us is going to say, well, we might shout about that's wrong when our opponents are doing it. Actually, we probably won't shout about it at all, because that is the way forward. That's how people communicate. 50 years, 100 years ago, they were concerned about what newspaper editors thought. 20, 30 years ago, all their efforts were going into how does TV cover us? And to some extent, that still matters. In the future, it will be about what, how can we run Facebook campaigns? How can we use the vast amount of data all of us are giving away every day to absolutely target people? Last Tory campaign for Mayor of London, the Tory candidate had highly, highly targeted ads from data he'd bought. He targeted Hindu voters in particular, Indian voters, particularly Tamil Indian voters. If Sadiq Khan were elected, he would steal your gold. In Tamil communities in particular, place a great emphasis on storing wealth in gold. It's traditional hedge. That's what you've got money, you buy gold. Where on earth did this come from? Well, first of all, someone in the Tory party had been clever enough to sit down and work it out. And it's because notionally, Sadiq Khan supported a wealth tax, so they thought they could target particularly Hindu, Indian, Tamil voters on that. Separately, to white working class voters, they were saying that Sadiq Khan appeared on stage with the Muslim Brotherhood, blah, 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 you know. And that was targeted that group. What's fascinating about it, and what's fascinating about the way politics, like advertising, is going, just as you don't turn on your TV if you go home and watch ITV tonight and see an advert designed for, I don't know, what any of your interests are. Suppose someone here likes fishing and your searches have made that clear, and Facebook just shows you adverts for fishing gear. You won't see an advert for fishing gear on Coronation Street. You'll see a general advert aimed at as many people possible, and crucially an advert everyone else can see. Increasingly now, we're going to world. You can't even, outsiders are going to find it very, very hard to see the adverts targeted quite specifically in a specific group. I mean, a sensible reform would be to insist on a public bank of all adverts. They should be open to view, but at the moment they're not. You just don't know what propaganda is going out. So, on the one hand, political propaganda is highly targeted. On the other, it's highly protected because you can't see it. For newspapers, we've kind of become, we were sort of the first in some ways with New World. I remember, because we were first to just have unlimited comments under our articles. And it was just bizarre, utterly bizarre. You'd write a piece on a constitution subject, there'd be thousands and thousands of comments. And people ask me, because I get a lot of criticism from left and right, and people ask me, say, well, doesn't it get to you? And you say, well, no, I just got used to the comments on newspaper articles. And it was noticeable women journalists always got it the worst, as is the case now on Twitter. But two things I remember from that time. This started about 2005, 2006, because employers, newspapers were so desperate to get in with the new web, and thought, this is the way to do it, because if we can keep people online commenting, we're getting more of their data, we're getting more of their preferences, there's some little money to be made in that. First of all, I was genuinely shocked at first. I was genuinely shocked for this reason. When you write for a serious paper, people think you just write. It's not the case. Your subject has to be agreed with your editor, who then talks about it while you're writing. You talk to them while you're writing. It then goes to your editor, in my case, the commentator. It might even go to the editor of the paper. They look through it. It then goes to sub-editors who check and fact-check, and it then goes to a lawyer. And so, all the time, if I want to make some outrageous claim, there are all these people who say, okay, Nick, well, can you prove it? What happens to those two? Then underneath, so you could write the most careful piece. I remember a friend of mine wrote one about the allegations, all true, that Cyril Smith abused kids in a children's home. And then he'd write the piece, it was so carefully done. And underneath there'd be a huge comment from a Smith supporter. So this is all lies, blah, 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 blah. Given equal prominence. In the end, I remember an editor at the Observer said, well, look, I don't want you reading the comments. I don't want people reading the comments under the articles. They're all written by mad people. And you'll get just as mad as they do. Because you'll think you've got to answer them. It's sort of was it Nietzsche? You stare too long into the abyss and the abyss will stare back at you. I mean, you just go like that. And at the time, another thing we took rather consolingly was it seems like there are vast numbers of people doing it. But in fact, there are just a few score people who are obviously on comment sites all the time, who must just spend their whole waking lives doing it. So again, you thought, well, that didn't really matter. It didn't matter. It does shift its terms of debate. It does shift it in the way that social media shifts it. You're at the BBC this morning, tonight, preparing an expedition for the Today programme. And you go on social media and you see thousands and thousands of people saying whatever the latest anti-Semitism scandal is about Jeremy Corbyn. This is just lies. Just lies. Whatever the fact is, it's just lies being weaponised. Or you go on social media and you see thousands of people saying Britain's being stabbed in the back. Brexit is being betrayed. Theresa May is really a Remainer. We could have had Brexit and been stopped by the elite. What do you do? Well, on the one hand, you can go through all the evidence and argue, and both propositions would, in my view, turn out to be false. On the other, you can say, well, hold on a second, we're the BBC, we're meant to represent everyone. All these people believe this. And that in itself is a political fact, regardless of whether it's true or not. So we've got to sort of bend with it. We've got to have Nigel Farage on 24/7, because he speaks for them and no one else does. We've got to have, I don't know, Richard Burgon or Rebecca Long-Bailey, the absolute stumbling apologists who can answer no hard questions on and get very angry when you ask a hard question, because they represent the other side. Is it our job to take this on when that is all out there and the evidence is there before us? Equally, if you are on a conservative newspaper, how hard do you go arguing against what is the rapidly forming view of the British right that we've just got to have a no-deal Brexit? You might notice that Nigel Farage is up and running again. What's so fascinating is rival parties supposed to be opposed to him are not taking him on. Where are the Tory politicians who are under threat from him standing up every time saying, hold on a second, you said we can just do this. Here's why you can't. Where are the Labour politicians who say they're so left-wing? Oh, gosh, the most left-wing Labour leader we've ever had. It's a miracle. Where are they taking on the populist right? They don't, because they half agree with them. And also they're frightened. Is that to do with social media? Would it have happened anyway if Facebook had never been invented, Twitter had never been invented? Maybe. It does make it... I said at the beginning there are two sources of power that the world the web came into: governments and corporations. Corporations we've talked about, Facebook, all these corporations, they just want your data. They have no public service duty. They are actually sort of a bugbear of mine. They're a source above the law, or they want to be above the law. Mainly the Clinton administration, as the net was developing, fell for lobbying from Silicon Valley in its 1997 bill covering media and communications, to essentially put them outside the law. And the argument from tech companies is really quite simple. Let's stick with Facebook's one we know. Was we can't be legally liable for everything that's posted on Facebook. We don't know. We just provide the site. They said, we're like the post office or a telephone company. Someone makes a call for our lines. We're not responsible if they're plotting a crime or plotting a terrorist attack or plotting a fraud. We don't know. We're just the company. And that argument has held very, very strongly. I think it's now falling apart for reasons I might get to. Well, I might as well do them now. Politicians. I've got an awful lot of respect for a great many MPs these days who, like Luciana Berger or Anna Soubry or Jess Phillips, and all the women they go for, are living with death threats. An awful lot of death threats. And you can say, well, 99 times out of 100, no one, it won't come to anything. Well, it's not a great consolation, really. What happens if you're the 100th time? They are experiencing how social media is used to threaten and to abuse. So I think we're going to get a new generation of politicians going to be far tougher. But the great interest of the state is China, where the web has been entirely co-opted, where there's a great firewall making it very difficult, not impossible, very difficult to see outside information. So there goes all the libertarian possibilities of the web, there goes all the liberal possibilities, there goes a little bit of the Arab Spring everywhere. But it's also a great tool of surveillance. Orwell in 1984 had a television screen looking at you. Well, he was nearly right, it was a computer screen. We're getting to the stage in China now where big data means that the state can collect all kinds of information on you, not just your criminal records, but whether you're a good citizen. And if you are a good citizen, you get favours. You get official favours and passes. So that's the state. the corporations we've talked about. But there was another facet as well. The networking feature of the web does allow extremism to grow. But you know, it made Islamic State, allowed it to reach its market. Now perhaps that was happened anyway. It does allow far-right groups to operate. Donald Trump doesn't care that whatever it was, 95% of American newspapers endorse Hillary Clinton. Well, why should he care about that? Yeah, he's got his own direct marketing to his voters. The newspapers are irrelevant. I'm angry. You're sitting at me. I think he is.
No, I think we ought to just.
Okay.
We need to have some type of questions. And,
all right.
And you've got a train to catch as well. So.
All right. Sorry. So very quickly. I'll say very quickly. There does need to be far more rigorous state interference. Yes, it's ludicrous to make Twitter liable for every tweet published, but if you complain to Twitter, if you make a formal complaint saying, I'm being liable, my privacy is being invaded, there are nude pictures of me, what they call revenge porn, going up on Facebook, and Facebook say, nah, not doing anything, then they're liable. They're as liable as a newspaper that does that to you. There has got to be intense look at how money is spent on companies like Facebook. You should not be Russia or the Koch brothers or whoever, or unite and be able to give money to a political party that's then used to produce propaganda and no one even knows who does it. Again, companies that do that should face punishment themselves, not saying, oh well, we blame Cambridge Analytica. In other words, if you want to protect liberal democracy has got to protect itself a bit. It's got to use the law. And it can't say social media companies are above the law. It can't say, oh, we're going to tear up our hard-won rules to limit the money spent on politics because it inconveniences a company in America. If they want to work here, they have to obey our laws. Thank you.